I buried my brother 42 years ago, yet there are mornings when I still reach for my phone expecting a message from him. Loss leaves strange marks on a man. It settles into the quiet corners of your life, into the spaces between breaths, until you learn to live around it the way you live around an old injury. I was 23 the winter I lost Evan. He was 19, reckless, kind, too gentle for the world, the sort of boy who apologized to insects when he stepped on them by accident. I remember the last time I saw him. He was boarding a long-distance bus, his backpack slung over one shoulder, his coat too thin for the weather. He turned at the doorway, lifted 2 fingers in a lazy salute, and grinned like the future was waiting to open just for him. I always wondered why I did not hug him that morning. I told myself we were both in a hurry, but the truth is that you never think it is the last time. You never imagine that a goodbye could be final. The storm that swallowed that bus came suddenly, a vicious white curtain that rolled across the region like a living thing, wind howling through the passes, visibility dropping so low that even the rescue crews struggled to see their own boots in the snow. They told me later that the bus had slid off an icy patch and crashed down a ravine. 17 passengers died that night. The rest were injured or missing long enough to give every family a brief sliver of hope before the cold facts arrived. I drove through the storm the next morning, gripping the wheel as if my hands could keep the world from splitting apart. When I reached the small morgue where they had brought the victims, I felt a numbness settle over me. Not peace, not acceptance, just the kind of shock that makes everything feel like a bad dream. The attendant pulled back the sheet. I remember the fluorescent light flickering overhead, casting a sickly glow across the face I was supposed to recognize. The body was battered, swollen, barely human, the features distorted by the impact and the freezing temperatures. I looked at that face, searching for Evan beneath the injuries. The hair was the right color. The build was close enough. His hands were bruised but shaped like I remembered. I told myself I knew. I told myself this was my brother. I said the words because someone had to. Because I could not bear the idea of leaving him unclaimed, lying on a metal table in a room that smelled of disinfectant and grief. I told my mother that her youngest son was gone. She broke in a way I had never seen. She tried to be brave at the funeral, her hands trembling as she clutched the folded cloth they handed her. But afterward, she was never the same. Something dimmed inside her. She cooked less, laughed less, talked less. For decades, she moved like someone carrying an invisible weight on her chest. She died 10 years ago, still mourning a boy who never made it home. Life carried on for the rest of us. I worked, I married, I raised children. But grief has a way of becoming part of your rhythm. It drifts into your thoughts during long drives. It sits quietly beside you when the house is too still. It returns with surprising sharpness on cold winter mornings, when the sky looks like the day he left. I have spent years replaying the moment in the morgue. Sometimes I tell myself there was nothing else I could have done. Other times I remember how the light flickered and how the sheet trembled slightly when they pulled it back, as if even the air itself was holding its breath. There were details that never quite settled right in my mind. The angle of the jaw seemed slightly off. The scar Evan had on his wrist from falling off his bike when he was 12 was hidden under bruises, impossible to see clearly. I dismissed those doubts for decades, pushing them into the quiet back rooms of my memory, because acknowledging them felt like betraying the family I had tried so hard to protect. Time moved forward, but part of me stayed frozen on that day. You think with enough years, Pain softens into dull edges, but that is not entirely true. Some things do not fade. They wait, patient and silent, like embers under ash. And every winter when the first snow fell, I found myself standing at the window, remembering the boy with the thin coat and hopeful smile, wondering if I should have driven him myself instead of letting him board that bus alone. I did not know then that grief was not the only thing waiting for me. I had no idea that buried beneath those 42 years of silence and acceptance, the truth was still alive, still breathing, still waiting for its moment to rise. I thought the past was settled, sealed in a coffin and lowered into the earth. I thought the dead stayed dead. I was wrong. It was just after 2 in the morning when the phone rang. At my age, calls at that hour feel like warnings from fate, the kind that make your chest tighten before you even reach for the receiver. The room was dark, the air cold, the kind of quiet that presses on your ears. I remember staring at the glowing screen for a few seconds, waiting for the number to disappear as if it were some mistake. It was a number I did not know, but the area code was familiar in a way that tugged at something old inside me, something I had spent decades burying. I almost let it ring out. But then I heard myself exhale, steady and shaky at once, and I answered. There was breathing first, slow, uneven, as if the person on the other end had been running or crying or both. Then a voice came through, rough like sand scraping against wood. "Michael," it said. "Michael, is it really you?" For a moment my mind was empty. I felt more awake than I had in years, as if something had reached inside my chest and pulled me violently into the present. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice sounding brittle. The breathing stopped for a second, replaced by a tremble. "It is me," the voice said. "It is Evan." The phone slipped slightly in my hand. I gripped it tighter, afraid it might fall. I felt heat rising behind my eyes, not tears yet, just the sort of shock that drowns you before you can breathe. "This is not funny," I said. "This is cruel. My brother died 42 years ago." "I know," the voice whispered. "I know how long it has been. I just found out who I am. I found something, a newspaper clipping, a picture, and a name that feels like a memory I lost long ago. I could not speak. I could barely breathe." The voice continued slowly, hesitantly, as if trying not to frighten me. "I do not remember much before the last 15 years. Everything before that feels like fog. But sometimes I see things. A small wooden house with peeling blue paint. A kitchen that smells like cinnamon on cold mornings. Someone humming while stirring a pot. And a dog, Baxter, a black and brown mutt who used to sleep at the foot of someone's bed. My bed, I think. My mouth went dry. Baxter had been our dog when Evan was a child. A noisy, loyal creature that followed him around like a shadow. Almost no one outside the family ever knew about him. Memories like that do not surface by accident. "Where are you?" I asked, my voice unsteady. "I do not know the exact name," the man said. "It is a shelter, downtown area. Someone told me that is what people call it. I do not remember how I got here. I do not remember the last time I knew my own name until today." Then his voice dropped, trembling with fear. "I think someone has been following me. The last few nights I have seen the same man standing across the street, watching the shelter. When I found the newspaper, when I started asking questions, he came inside once asking if anyone had seen me. I hid. I do not know why, but something inside me told me he was connected to whatever happened to me. The room felt suddenly smaller, the shadows heavier. Something cold passed through me, the kind of chill that feels like a premonition. I asked him for the address. His breathing hitched as he read the numbers from a faded sign on the wall. I wrote them down with a shaking hand. "Do not go anywhere," I told him. "Do not talk to anyone. Do not step outside. I am leaving now. I will find you." "Michael," he said softly. "Michael, I do not know what kind of person I used to be. I do not even know if I deserve to be found." His voice cracked. But when I saw that picture, I felt something pull inside my chest. I needed to hear your voice at least once, even if I disappear again. "You are not disappearing," I said. "You are not going anywhere. Stay inside. Wait for me. I am coming." The line went quiet. Not dead, just silent, as if the man on the other end was holding his breath. Then he whispered, almost too soft to hear, "I will wait." For the first time in decades, I felt the familiar ache of hope and fear battling in my ribs. When the call ended, I sat in the dark, listening to the blood rushing in my ears. For a long moment I could not move. Then something broke loose inside me. I threw on my jacket, grabbed my keys, and stepped into the freezing night air. The sky was black, heavy with stillness, the kind of silence that feels like the world is bracing for something. I did not look back as I locked the door behind me. I did not know if I was driving toward a miracle or a nightmare. But for the first time since the winter of the crash, I felt something I had not felt in 42 years. A summons, a calling, a voice from the dead saying my name. And I drove into the darkness with a single thought echoing in my mind. If this was truly Evan, he had survived something monstrous. And if it was not him, then a different kind of darkness was waiting for me on the other side of that long night. The road stretched ahead of me like a ribbon disappearing into darkness. I had driven this route many times in my youth, but that night it felt transformed, as if the land itself sensed something long buried was beginning to shift. The highway was empty, not a single pair of headlights in sight, and the silence inside the car grew heavier with every passing mile. Even the engine sounded distant, muffled, as though it too hesitated to break the stillness. I kept replaying the phone call in my mind, the way the voice had trembled when it said my name, the way it clung to phrases from the past, like a man clutching jagged pieces of memory. The night was thick with fog, rolling in low from the surrounding hills, making the road feel like a tunnel carved through smoke. My thoughts swirled as thick as the mist. I found myself drifting back to the morgue again, picturing that cold table, that broken face I had convinced myself belonged to my brother. In the quiet hum of the car, doubt grew louder than any sound outside. What if I had made a mistake? What if the chaos of that storm and the urgency of identifying the victims had blinded me? When you are young and grieving, you do not question what you are told. You do not dare imagine another reality because hope can feel like betrayal. But now hope had called me at 2 a.m, using my brother's voice. A sudden gust of wind slammed against the side of the car, jarring me back to the present. The fog thickened, swallowing the reflectors on the road, until it felt like I was driving through nothing at all. I slowed down, gripping the wheel tighter, the white lines barely visible. The farther I went, the more oppressive the night became, as if the world wanted to keep me from reaching the truth. I found myself glancing at the empty back seat, irrationally expecting someone to be there. Every few minutes I caught a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye, only to realize it was just my own reflection in the side mirror, stretched and ghostly. The shelter address sat on a crumpled piece of paper beside me. My mind kept circling around the stranger who had visited the shelter asking for Evan. Why would anyone be looking for him after all these years? Who would even know he was alive, or working to reclaim fragments of a past he could barely remember? Every time I tried to piece it together, the sensation of being watched crawled across my skin like cold fingertips. Maybe it was fear talking, or maybe it was something else. Instinct, perhaps. Hours passed in that suspended haze until the faint glow of streetlights finally appeared through the fog. The city emerged slowly, rising like a weary shadow in the night. The deeper I drove, the grimmer it became. Empty storefronts boarded up with warped plywood, narrow alleys littered with glass. Figures wrapped in blankets huddled under stoops, smoke rising from makeshift fires in rusted barrels. The air smelled of damp asphalt, burnt plastic, and the quiet resignation of people who had been forgotten. I parked near the shelter and stepped out, the cold hitting me like a slap. The building looked old, the paint peeling, a dim bulb flickering above the door. I pulled my jacket tighter and started toward the entrance when a voice from behind stopped him. You looking for someone, sir? I turned to find a man standing under a street lamp, his face gaunt but alert. He had the sharp, wary eyes of someone who had seen too much. I hesitated, measuring whether to trust him. I am looking for someone who might have stayed here, I said. A man about 60, gray hair, thin, moves carefully. Might have answered to the name Evan. The stranger nodded slowly. Yeah, I seen him, he said. Came around asking questions like he was trying to remember who he used to be. Staying mostly at the shelter down the block. But he was spooked this morning. Said someone came looking for him. Someone who did not belong here. His voice dropped. That man did not ask like a friend. More like he owned something and wanted it back. A cold weight settled in my stomach. Do you know where Evan went? I asked. The stranger pointed down a narrow alley toward a dim building with a cross above the door. Sometimes he hides in there. The church keeps its lights on all night. People go in when they are scared. I thanked him and walked quickly, my pulse thudding in my ears. The fog thickened again, swirling under the street lamps like smoke rising from unseen fires. As I approached the building, a shadow moved inside, slow and uncertain. My heart leapt. A shape hunched near the doorway, a familiar stillness, a silhouette that felt carved out of a memory too old to trust. It was him, or at least the man who claimed to be him. And in that moment, as he lifted his face toward me, I realized the truth would be far more terrifying than anything I had imagined while driving through the night. He was sitting alone near a row of wooden pews, his back curved as if the weight of years had bent him into that posture permanently. A small lamp near the altar cast a dim amber glow across the room, turning the polished floor into a pool of worn reflections. I stood in the doorway for a moment, my breath caught somewhere between fear and disbelief. When he turned his head toward me, the movement was slow, hesitant, almost guarded. But then our eyes met, and everything inside me stilled. The eyes. That was what cut through the fog of doubt. They were the same warm amber brown that Evan had, flecked with a gold tint near the iris, a trait he inherited from our father. I had never seen that exact color on anyone else, not once in my life. He stared at me as if trying to place me in the right corner of his fragmented memory. I stepped closer, my pulse pounding so loudly that the quiet church seemed to vibrate with it. "Evan," I said, though my voice barely rose above a whisper. His lips parted, trembling. "Michael," he said, as if tasting the name for the first time in decades. "Michael, I think it is you." He stood slowly, each movement stiff, the joints refusing to obey with ease. When the light hit his face, I saw the full cruelty of what time and hardship had done to him. Deep lines carved across his forehead, skin leathered by sun and cold, a scar running from his cheekbone down to the edge of his jaw. He looked 20 years older than me, though I knew he was much younger. I walked closer until we stood only a few feet apart. "Show me your left arm," I said quietly. He hesitated just long enough for fear to slip into my chest, then rolled up his sleeve. There it was, the long, pale scar that ran like a faded thread along his forearm. A childhood injury from when I dared him to jump off a low fence with me and he fell wrong. 12 stitches, a summer of bandages, and a lifetime of teasing each other about our bad decisions. Seeing that scar undid me. I felt my knees weaken, my breath thin. I reached out, and for a moment, he flinched as if expecting pain. That reaction stabbed deeper than any wound. I lowered my hand slowly. "It is you," I whispered. "It is really you." He sank back down into the pew, as if the confirmation itself drained whatever strength he had left. He clasped his hands, the knuckles cracked and scarred, and spoke with a voice that shook. "I do not remember everything, Michael. Sometimes I remember a smell, a sound, a feeling, but never a full moment. I remember snow. I remember waking up with cold in my bones so deep I thought I was going to die from it. And I remember faces, blurred faces, men shouting, a place that always smelled like oil and wet earth." I sat beside him. The church was silent except for the hum of the heating vents. "Tell me what happened after the crash," I urged. He pressed a hand to his forehead, fingers trembling. "I do not remember the crash itself, just darkness, then waking up on a rough cot in a small cabin. I could not move at first. My head throbbed. I tried to ask where I was, but every time I spoke, someone would shove me back down. Then there were months, maybe years. I cannot tell time from those days. I worked, lifting, carrying, splitting wood, hauling supplies, always under watch, always exhausted." His voice cracked, and he swallowed hard before continuing. "They called the man the foreman. Big voice, heavy boots. He was the one who checked on me. I remember him saying things that made no sense at the time, like 'you will learn your place,' or 'do not think about your past,' or 'the past is gone.' You hear me? Gone. I thought maybe I had done something wrong, or maybe I belonged to them somehow. I felt a chill move through me. Who would keep a man alive, injured and memoryless, just to use him? What operation thrived in isolation enough to hide a survivor of a deadly crash? And why would someone come looking for him now, decades later?" Evan rubbed his temples as if trying to dig through layers of fog. "A few days ago, a man came to the shelter asking for me. I saw him through the window. He looked older than I remember, but something in me recognized him. The way he stood, the shape of his shoulders. I think he was the foreman. The air in the room felt suddenly thin. My breath wavered as the implications unfolded. Someone who once held him captive might be alive, close, watching. Someone who had reason to make sure Evan never remembered the truth. We sat in silence until I forced myself to speak again. "We need a DNA test," I said. "We need proof. For you, for me, for whatever comes next." He nodded slowly, defeated and hopeful in the same breath. "All right," he whispered. "I want to know who I am, even if the truth hurts." As we stepped out into the cold night together, the fog curled around us like a living thing. I felt the first sliver of certainty since the phone call. The man beside me carried the same eyes, the same scar, and the same quiet gentleness that Evan had as a boy. But he also carried something else, something haunted, something hunted. And I understood, with a dread that gripped me like a claw, that finding him was only the beginning. We left the church before dawn, the air sharp with the cold that precedes sunrise. Evan walked beside me with stiff steps, as if each one required conscious effort. Every few minutes he glanced over his shoulder, flinching at shadows that shifted across the empty streets. I wanted to reassure him, tell him he was safe now, but I did not have the confidence to say such a thing. Not after everything he had suggested, not after the mention of the foreman. The streets were nearly deserted, save for the sad silhouette of a man rummaging through a bin and the sound of a distant siren echoing off concrete. I guided Evan toward the car parked under a flickering street lamp. He hesitated before getting in, his hand pausing on the door handle. He looked at me with a strange vulnerability. "Will they find me here?" he asked. "Will he find me again?" I shook my head, though a knot tightened in my throat. "Not tonight," I said. "Not if we move quickly." We drove across the quieter part of the city to a private testing lab that opened early for appointments requiring discretion. The receptionist had the flat, unbothered expression of someone who had seen every kind of desperation walk through the door. I filled out the paperwork with a hand that trembled despite my attempts to steady it. Evan sat beside me, fidgeting with the frayed hem of his sleeve, his eyes drifting everywhere except the people around him. Loud sounds made him jerk. A shifting chair made him tense. Every movement felt defensive, instinctive. The procedure itself was quick. A swab inside the cheek for both of us. A few signatures. A promise that the results would be ready in 48 hours. The technician told us with professional indifference that the test was highly accurate. There would be no ambiguity. Either we were brothers or we were not. When we stepped back outside, the sky had lightened into a pale gray. The morning traffic hummed to life. Evan stood on the sidewalk staring at the city as if seeing it for the first time. "What now?" he asked. I had not thought that far ahead. The shelter was out of the question. Not after what he had said about the man asking for him. A hotel would at least offer privacy. I chose one far from the shelter, a small motel near the edge of town where anonymity was easy to come by. Inside the room, Evan sat at the edge of the bed with his shoulders hunched, hands clasped between his knees. He looked smaller somehow, like a man who had spent years folding himself into the corners of places. I ordered food, something simple and warm. He ate in silence, devouring it quickly, as if afraid someone would take it from him. Afterward, he leaned back and rested his head against the wall with a long exhale. I watched him. The lines on his face, the way his eyes darted around the room, the way he flinched every time footsteps passed outside the door. When he started talking, it was without prompting, as if something inside him had cracked open. "The memories come in pieces," he said, "like shards of something broken. I do not know which ones are real and which ones are dreams. I tried not to move or interrupt. I wanted to memorize every word he was finally willing to share. I remember waking up on a cot in a cabin," he said. "My head hurt so much I could barely see. When I tried to get up, someone pushed me down. They said I was lucky to be alive. They said I should not ask questions. The man with the deep voice, Tom, the one they called the foreman, watched me like I was some tool he was waiting to sharpen." He paused, swallowing as if the memory tasted bitter. "They put me to work when I could stand, chopping wood, carrying crates, mixing cement. I never saw a calendar, never saw a clock. The only time I knew was when the foreman came through. He dragged his fingers across his temples as if trying to soothe an ache. I do not know how long I was there. Winters, summers. They blurred, but I remember men coming and going, all of them tired, all of them quiet. No one talked about life before that place. No one dared to. A shiver crawled up my spine. It sounded like a hidden world, a place where people disappeared so completely that even time forgot them. He continued slowly, as if wrestling with the fragments. "Then one day I woke up somewhere else. A back alley. No memory of how I got there. Someone robbed me, beat me. A hospital took me for 3 days. They asked for my name. I had none. After that I drifted." He looked up at me, eyes wide with a fear that felt ancient. "And now someone is looking for me again. Someone who does not want me to remember." I felt my stomach drop. 2 days later, the call came. The lab technician sounded both casual and precise. "The results are conclusive," she said. "The probability of a sibling match is 99.9%. I sat on the edge of the motel bed as the meaning washed over me. He was my brother. Evan let out a sound that was half sob, half relief, and folded forward, face in his hands. His whole body shook as if decades of wandering, pain, and confusion had finally found a name to cling to. But even as we embraced, even as the truth settled into something undeniable, a shadow lingered behind his eyes. Someone had taken him. Someone had kept him. And someone, even now, might not be done with him yet. The morning after we received the DNA results, I took Evan to a small nonprofit clinic tucked between an abandoned grocery store and a row of shuttered apartments. The building looked unremarkable from the outside, but I had been told that one of the physicians here specialized in trauma cases. Trauma of the kind that did not merely bruise skin, but rewired the mind. Her name was Dr. Lena Morwood, and she greeted us with a calmness that cut through the tension I had been carrying since the night of the phone call. She led us into a small examination room lit by soft white bulbs rather than harsh fluorescence. Evan hesitated near the doorway, his shoulders tensing the moment he heard the distant clatter of a metal tray. "It is all right," she said gently, motioning him toward the examination table. Evan moved slowly, as if fighting an instinct that told him to run. As she examined him, she narrated her observations quietly, almost as if she were speaking to herself. "Old fractures along the ribs," she murmured. "Healed long ago but poorly treated. a break in the left forearm that should have been set by a doctor, but was not. Scar tissue along the back, some from deep lacerations. And here, she added, pressing lightly behind his ear, a depression in the skull. That indicates a severe head injury, likely the cause of his long-term memory loss. I stood there feeling something inside me unravel. Seeing the physical evidence of what he had endured made everything suddenly sharper, uglier, more real than I could have imagined. It felt like I had lost him twice, once to the crash, and again to whatever hell he had been dragged into afterward. Dr. Morwood stepped back and folded her hands, her expression thoughtful. "Mr. Hale," she said, addressing Evan, "you survived something catastrophic. That part is clear. But what happened after the initial injury is what troubles me. Injuries like these do not heal on their own. Someone tended to you, at least enough to keep you alive. Someone was nearby in the weeks following the accident." Evan lowered his gaze. His fingers twisted nervously. "They took me," he whispered. "The foreman and the others. They kept telling me I had no past, that I should not think about anything besides the work." "That fits," she said softly. "It fits more than you know." She reached for a folder on her desk and opened it to a page filled with handwritten notes. Over the years, I have seen patients with similar backgrounds. People found wandering in remote areas, disoriented, injured, unable to recall their identities. Some of them later described being forced into labor camps or illegal work sites hidden deep in forests and rural land. "Most operations like that move frequently," she continued. "They recruit people who cannot fight back, people without names, people who will not be missed." My throat tightened. "Are you saying," I asked quietly, "that he was taken from the crash site? That they kept him alive because he was useful?" She nodded. "A bus accident in a remote area. Chaos. Bodies recovered in terrible condition. Darkness, snow, confusion among rescue teams. It would not have been difficult for someone to pull an unconscious survivor away before authorities arrived. And if identification was rushed or based on damaged remains, a mistake could have happened." A sickening realization crawled through me. When I identified the body, I said slowly, the face was unrecognizable. The injuries were severe. I did not question anything. I just assumed. I thought I owed it to my family. She gave me a compassionate but steady look. "You were grieving. You were 23. No one can fault you for that. But you should also know something else." She turned a page in her folder and revealed a document, yellowed from time. Decades ago, around the same winter as the crash, there was a missing persons report filed for a man who vanished near one of the forest routes. He disappeared at night without a trace. A witness claimed to have seen him being pulled into a pickup truck. "The description of the truck," she said, "matches reports from others who escaped illegal work sites over the years." I felt the room tilt slightly. "Are you saying someone was already scouting victims during that time? Someone who might have found Evan when he was wounded and confused?" Dr. Morwood nodded grimly. "It is possible. Some operations back then were known for masking their actions beneath natural disasters. When chaos happens, no one questions an extra missing person. If Evan was taken, someone benefited from making him disappear." Evan clutched the edge of the table, his knuckles white. "I remember someone saying that word," he whispered. "Missing." They laughed when they said it. They said missing meant no one cared enough to look for you. something inside me broke. I stepped toward him, placed a hand on his shoulder. "You were never missing, Evan. I just did not know where to look." Dr. Morwood closed her folder. "You both need to understand something," she said. "This man is your brother, but he is not the boy you lost. His identity was shattered and rebuilt under conditions meant to erase him. Healing will be slow. Memories may return, or they may remain fragmented forever. But what matters is that he is here now, and someone may not want that." Her eyes darkened slightly at her final words, as if she were measuring a silent threat in the air. I understood then that the past was not finished with us, not by a long stretch. And the people who had once taken Evan might not be finished either. Bringing Evan home felt like welcoming back a ghost I had never expected to see again. He stood at the threshold of my house with a hesitant posture, as if afraid the space would reject him. The moment he stepped inside, he looked around slowly, taking in the framed photographs, the soft rug by the fireplace, the smell of coffee lingering in the air. These ordinary details seemed overwhelming to him. He touched the wall lightly, as though testing whether it was solid or some trick of memory. For the first few days, he was quiet. He slept fitfully, waking gasping from nightmares that left him shaking. Sometimes he paced the hallway at night, unwilling to be still in the darkness. Other times he sat near the window, staring out toward the quiet road, as though expecting a figure to appear at any moment. I tried to be reassuring, but it was clear that safety was a concept foreign to him after decades of survival. He started therapy with a local counselor, someone recommended by Dr. Morwood. The sessions left him exhausted, but lighter somehow, as if each word spoken peeled away a layer of the fog trapped in his mind. Small memories resurfaced. The way our mother hummed while stirring oatmeal, the crack in the back porch step he used to trip over, the smell of pine needles after rain. He remembered them in bursts, gentle flashes that felt like someone turning on lights in a long-abandoned house. Every afternoon I found him in the garden, hands buried in soil, tending to plants with a focus that bordered on reverence. He said the earth was easier to understand than people. Plants did not lie. They did not hide. They grew if you cared for them, and withered if you neglected them. The simplicity of that truth comforted him. My adult children came to visit. They approached Evan with tenderness and quiet curiosity. He watched them cautiously at first, unsure how to place them within the fragments of his identity. My youngest daughter eventually broke through when she sat beside him on the porch and handed him a cup of tea without saying a word. Silence, it seemed, was a language he understood better than most. But peace did not stay long. One evening, as I stepped outside to lock the gate, I saw the faint glint of headlights far down the road. A truck idled there for a moment, before slowly backing away, disappearing behind the tree line. At first, I dismissed it as a coincidence. Rural roads have their share of lost drivers. But 2 nights later, the same truck appeared again, engine running softly. Lights dimmed as though the driver wanted to remain unseen. When I stepped onto the porch, the vehicle crawled backward and vanished into the night. The first phone call came the next morning. I answered, expecting a telemarketer or a wrong number. Instead, I heard breathing. Slow, heavy. No words, just an oppressive silence that felt deliberate. After a few seconds, the caller hung up. The second call came that evening, then the third. Always the same pattern. No voice, only breath. By the fourth call, Evan stood behind me, pale as dust. "It is him," he whispered. "The foreman." I know that breathing. I heard it behind me every time he walked into the cabin. The phone nearly slipped from my hand. I tried to tell myself Evan's fear was shaping his perceptions, but deep down, I felt the same chill. Whoever was calling did not want a conversation. They wanted a reminder, a warning, a claim. Then came the incident in town. Evan and I had driven in for supplies. While I loaded groceries into the trunk, Evan froze in place, his eyes fixed across the parking lot. I followed his gaze and saw a man standing near the edge of the sidewalk, watching us openly. Heavy boots, thick jacket, broad shoulders, a stillness that radiated menace. When Evan whispered, "That is him," I felt something cold sink to the bottom of my stomach. Before I could react, the man turned abruptly, stepped into a dark pickup truck, and pulled away with a slow, deliberate pace. Not hurried, not fleeing, just leaving with the confidence of someone sending a message. Evan collapsed into the passenger seat, trembling so violently I could hear his teeth click. I shut the doors and drove home faster than I meant to, my pulse thudding in my ears. All this time, I believed I had rescued my brother from the shadows of his past. But watching that truck disappear around the curve, I understood something terrifying. The shadows had followed him home, and whoever had once taken him from the world was not finished yet. The days that followed felt stretched thin, as if time itself was bracing for something. I contacted the authorities and shared everything. Evan's memories, Dr. Morwood's findings, the truck that kept appearing near my property. They listened with the grim attentiveness of people who had seen more darkness in the world than most would ever believe. An investigation was opened, slow but deliberate, tracing old records, abandoned work sites, and men who had once operated on the edges of the law. Then, without warning, the sightings stopped. No truck, no calls, no figure at the edge of town. It was as if the presence that haunted us evaporated into the air. The silence that followed did not feel comforting. It felt like retreat, not surrender. A narrowing of eyes before the next move. But nothing came. Eventually, officials informed us that the man Evan had identified was found deceased in a remote cabin. Natural causes, no signs of struggle, no evidence of anyone else living there. Only a single journal filled with odd entries, numbers, dates, terse notes, and one line written repeatedly. He does not remember. Keep it that way. There was no satisfaction in the discovery, only a heavy, hollow relief. The past had closed one of its doors, not gently, but decisively. Evan and I visited the grave that once bore his name. The headstone felt like a monument to a life stolen, not lost. We stood without speaking for a long time. Finally, Evan touched the cold stone and whispered, "That boy is gone, Michael, but I am still here. Let him rest." We decided to leave the grave as it was, not a marker of death, but a reminder of survival's cost. On the drive home, I glanced at Evan. He looked out the window with a calmness I had not seen before. Not peace exactly, but direction. I realized then the lesson these 42 years had carved into both of us. Hope is not fragile. It is stubborn. It waits quietly under the ruins, ready to rise when the world believes it has been buried for good. Family is not just memory. It is choosing again and again to walk beside someone through their darkest corridors, until light finds its way back in. And sometimes, the greatest miracle is simply that someone survived long enough to come home.